Well, the Most High be praised today. We bless the Almighty for His wonderful works and all that He is doing. And we praise the Most High for another opportunity to come and to provide the teaching of the Scriptures today. It's always a privilege to be able to share in teaching during our midweek Wednesday time. And of course, we finished with prayer not long ago. And it's always wonderful to come in and to pray and to seek the Almighty and to intercede and to worship our King, knowing that He hears us, knowing that He's going to move and work and bring about His purposes in the lives of His people. Before I get into the teaching, I do want to ask that the people of Elohim continue to pray for the present situation that all of us are experiencing. We need to pray that people that are committing acts of crime such as looting and vandalizing and doing all of those things, that they would cease. It's really causing a great deal of harm and even death to some that are helping to try to quell this. We want to pray that the people that are not acting in accordance with the laws would cease from their activity. I am one that believes, no doubt, in social justice, and I believe in peaceful protests, but I do not believe in the destruction of property, and nor in the taking of life at the expense of destroying property or stealing that does not belong to them. And so we want to pray for what's going on right now, that these things would cease, and that there would be shalom, and that true justice would come to pass among those who have not been operating properly as being servants to society. So we want to pray for that to happen, and we believe the Almighty that will. But I do ask for the prayers of the saints so that there would be shalom and a degree of order. I know that people are very angry. I know that people are hurt. I understand that. I share in that because I also am a part of that oppressed stock of people. But we must do what is right at all times, and that is so very important. Today I want to share from the Scriptures. I want to go to the book of Hebrews, chapter 1, verse 1. And before we do that, let us pray. Abinu Makain, our Father, our King, thank you for this time and for this opportunity to provide the teaching of the Scriptures. I pray, Most High, that you would give me wisdom to know how to share this information where it would edify and also where it would bring clarity to those who may be viewing your word in a way that is not the correct and proper way of viewing it. And so I ask you, Abba, that you would guide me in the teaching, give me wisdom to be able to share, and may your great name be praised, that we, by your Holy Spirit, may be guided into the truth. We bless you in Yahshua's name. Amen. All right, let's get to it. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. And I'm going to read from the New Revised Standard Version. I might flip over to the King James Version and my Greek interlinear to check out a couple things regarding it. But I'm going to start in the translation that I have here. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1. And this is what it says. It says, long ago, Elohim spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, or by the Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also created the worlds. Now, this is a powerful statement that is made by the writer of the book of Hebrews. He starts off the letter by stating that in the past, that Elohim had spoken to our ancestors, the house of Israel, by the prophets. Now, we need to note that this statement was made in the first century. So, the writer who's writing Hebrews, and the reason why I say the writer who's writing Hebrews, because it is a little bit of a uncertainty there as to whether it might be the Apostle Paul or someone else. So I use the person who wrote the book of Hebrews. But at any rate, this was written in the first century. And during a time when the Israelites, the Judean Israelites in particular, were there in the land of Israel, as well as there being the scattered 10 tribes and other Judean Israelites that were scattered throughout the Roman Empire of that day. Many were just coming to an awareness of Yahshua the Messiah, the sect of the Nazarenes of that day, which is what they were referred to as. And when they were preaching about Yahshua, and no doubt the Israelites of that day were probably wondering, wait, we've got the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. We already have what we need. And so the writer of Hebrews wanted to clarify that, yes, in times past, Elohim spoke to us through the prophets. But in these last days, he has given us his word, or he has spoken to us through his Son. So the focus of the writer of Hebrews is to help us to understand that from the time in which the Messiah left and gave the mandate to go and make disciples and teach them to observe everything that he had commanded them, that from that point on, people were to now hear and be led primarily by the teaching and the word that came from the Messiah, Yahshua. So what the writer of Hebrews is saying is that now we need to make Messiah and what he has taught to be primary and first place. Now notice something interesting about this is that he says that, but in these last days. You know, a lot of people, they have this idea of thinking that the last days began somewhere around about the latter part of the 20th century. And they wanted to really hype it up saying, well, we're in the last days, we're in the last days. Well, newsflash, the last days began when the Messiah left. I'll say it again. The last days began when the Messiah left. Now, I've been preaching this for many years. The last days did not just begin when the state of Israel became a state in 1948. And you had the dispensationalists teaching and talking about, well, you know what, the Messiah will come in about a generation from that time. He hasn't came yet. But the last days began when the Messiah left. And we're still in the last days. Somewhat now, almost 200 years. If we say Messiah, he left roughly somewhere around about 30 CE, somewhere around about that time. It's almost coming up on 2,000 years that we've been in the last times. So the last days began sometime before. But the point of the matter is that the Messiah is the one that has now been given the authority over all things. It says whom he has now been appointed the heir of all things. And it says that through him he created the worlds. Now that's an interesting thing here. You know, because when we hear the concept of Messiah being the creator, and the fact that he created the universe, this verse says that he did not just create the cosmos, but he created cosmoses. He created the worlds. That's interesting. That means, I'll just leave that out. I'll just leave that out there. Okay? He created the worlds. And whatever you want to call that, if you want to call the worlds other planets, if you want to call whatever, however you want to call it, you want to call it other galaxies, whatever you want to call it, it says he created the worlds. And so it's important that we note that all things were created by him. This is some powerful stuff. All things were created by him. That's verse 2 that I read. I read verses 1 and 2. So now what we need to do is look at the fact that Yahshua is the one that we are to now listen to. Which means everything that Yahshua taught, every perspective that he brought regarding the scriptures, we must follow. Now, with that being said, there are many who have the idea that since Yahshua is the one that Elohim is now speaking through, or has spoken through, because he has spoken to us by his Son, and Yahshua has already given us his word. He's not continually giving us new revelation. So if anyone comes along and they say, well, he's always dispensing new revelation, don't follow that, because it's not true. I'll say it again. Don't follow that, because it is not true. Because before the Messiah died, he prayed to the Father in John chapter 17, and he said, those that you have given to me, I have kept them, and I have finished the work that you have given me to do. I have given them your word. So the Messiah has already spoken, and I'm saying that in the past tense. He has already spoken, and he has given to us his word, which he received from the Father, and he gave it to his apostles, the Sheliachim. So he has already spoken, he has already given it to us. We already have it, and it has been written and put in the book. That's why it says in this verse that in these last days he has, past tense, spoken to us by his Son. Now, for those who focus on the fact that the Messiah is the only one we're supposed to listen to, there are others who suggest, and I'll say more than suggest, they have come up with the concept that the writings of the prophets, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, are now invalid. There are some who would use the phrase, the Old Testament, there are some who would use the phrase Moses teaching to say that Moses taught this, but Messiah taught this. And there is distinctions that are being made because of certain phrases that are noted in the scriptures, because when you read the writings of the apostles, there are places where it refers to the Torah as being called Moses. And some have taken that to mean that the Torah is the teachings of Moses, as if to say that Moses is the originator of those teachings, and that Moses was the one that included his ideas and his perspective in the writings that you find in Shemot, which is commonly called Exodus, and Devarim, which is commonly called Deuteronomy, and also Leviticus and Numbers. You know, there are those who have this idea that, you know, Moses is the one that wrote that, and that's Moses' teachings. And so, as we go back into the scriptures and we look at what the Messiah actually said with respect to the prophets that had spoken to our ancestors in time past, when we go back and look at what the Messiah said regarding that whole section of scripture, which at that particular time in history, in the first century, Moses, or the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, that was their Bible of the first century. And not just that, but they also had included in their Bible what is commonly called today as the Apocrypha. Y'all didn't know that, did you? But yes, all of that was in their Bible. They used all of that. But at any rate, when we go back and look at what the Messiah taught with respect to the Torah and the prophets, we find something very interesting. Let's go to the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 17. Since the writer of Hebrews, in addressing the Israelites, he's saying to them that in these last days he's spoken to us through his Son. So let's see what the Son said about the Torah and the prophets. What did he say about them? Did he cancel them? Did he say that they are no longer to be observed? Did he say that they were now ineffective since he came? Because there are some who will say, and I've heard this, that, well, Yeshua didn't teach us that we had to keep the feast. Yeshua didn't teach us that we had to keep the Sabbath. Yeshua didn't teach us, you know. And they'll go so far as to say, well, you know, Yeshua said that whatever, you know, you put in your mouth will not defile you. And there are a number of things that people, Bible teachers, have said without actually dealing with these statements that they are making within the contextual framework of the history and the culture of the time in which these statements were made. But let's go and see what the Messiah said about the Torah and the prophets. If we go to Matthew chapter 5 and we look at verses 17 through 19. Now let's look at what he actually said. All right. Now, just to preface this, because this here is contained within the initial teachings of the Messiah. When the Messiah began his public ministry, this particular chapter, chapter 5, is where he is teaching at the base of the mountain, and it's commonly called the Sermon on the Mount. And so, in his teaching, he is giving his perspective on various known religious norms of that day that were based upon what Torah said and were also based upon interpretations of what Torah said. In other words, the religious leaders' views about what the Torah said. And what the Messiah was doing was setting the record straight from the perspective of the Most High so that people would begin to see the Torah accurately, or as some would say, the spirit of the Torah. But when we get to Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, listen to what he says. And mind you, he is speaking to an audience of Judean Israelites, and they understood quite clearly that if anyone was to come against the Torah, the writings and the prophets, that not only would they not be received and heard, but they would be in danger of the judgment of the Sanhedrin. But listen to what the Messiah said. He says in verse 17, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the Torah." In here it says law, but in the Hebrew it would be Torah. He says, "Do not think that I have come to destroy or to abolish or to nullify the Torah or the prophets." Now earlier we said that the Almighty spoke to us in times past and in various ways by the prophets. Moses was one of those prophets. The section of scriptures that is noted to be written by Moses is the first 5 books, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are the common Greek names that most people are familiar with. And so, Messiah says, I've not come to do away with the Torah or the prophets. Now, when he says that, he's basically saying the scriptures that we all read each Sabbath, the scriptures that we hear each Sabbath, the scriptures that we have been trained in, these scriptures, I have not come to abolish them. So he wanted to settle and bring to ease the minds of his audience, so as they're hearing him, because he's a new preacher on the scene during this time. And he was different from the others. He preached and taught with authority. But he wanted to settle their minds so that they wouldn't think that he had come and was teaching something so brand new that it would override the Torah and the prophets. He said, I've not come to abolish it. But listen to what he said. He said, I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. The word here where it says fulfill means to complete. What he's saying is, I've come to bring completion to the book of scriptures. That's what he's saying. Now, some who will look at this, they will say, well, he came to fulfill it. That means that it's all over and done. Not so. We're going to keep reading. We're going to keep reading. And for those who want to have an honest answer, you got to keep reading. In verse 18, listen to what he says. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, one jot and not one tittle or stroke of a letter will pass from the Torah until all is accomplished. Now listen to me. He just said that until heaven and earth pass away. Now, when we read the writings of the prophets, it indicates that the passing away of the earth and the heavens will be the conclusion of the age. All right? And will be the beginning of the eternal state. We haven't yet arrived at the conclusion of the age or time as we know it. Listen again. I'm going to read it for those who are stuck. Listen to what he said. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot. Now the jot is the yod in Hebrew. At that time, since they were using block script along with the Paleo-Hebrew script, the yod looked like an apostrophe. That's just a small little curve. And the tittle was a part of a letter. And so what Messiah is actually saying here is that when you go and you read the scriptures, the smallest letter in the scriptures, which looks like an apostrophe, I mean, it's easy to eliminate an apostrophe. He said the smallest letter is not going to pass away. And the very part of a letter is not going to pass away. See, what Messiah is actually saying is that, I want to make it real clear, not one piece of what's in the scriptures, the smallest letter or the part of a letter that can change a letter to look like another letter, is going to pass. He said everything. He said, I want y'all to know that everything that's written in those scriptures, in the Torah and by the prophets, he says that heaven and earth will pass away first. This is what the Son is speaking. This is what the Son is teaching. He is teaching that the Torah and the prophets, the scriptures that had been given by Moses and all the other prophets, are going to remain. This is like the first thing he wants to settle in the minds of his audience. All right? We need to understand that. I'm not through. We're going to keep reading. Because as we keep reading, what you're going to find is that he is continually laying more layers or putting more layers on top of this to confirm the fact that the Torah and the prophets, the scriptures from what we call Bereshit to Malachi, or Genesis to Malachi, are permanent and remain in effect until heaven and earth passes. Let's continue. Because he says that not one yod or one tittle will in any wise pass until everything that needs to be accomplished will be accomplished. Every prophecy that needs to be accomplished will be accomplished. That means all of the prophecies about the restoration of the house of Israel back to the land, the judgments that will come upon the nations, everything that the Almighty has prophesied must come to pass first, and that is the conclusion of the entire age as we know it, and the wrapping up of time with the renewed heavens and the renewed earth, because the prophets prophesied that there would be renewed heavens and a renewed earth. What that indicates is the passing away of this present earth and present heaven. Torah is going to continue all the way up until that time. Now, verse 19, therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments. This is the Son speaking. The one to whom the writer of Hebrews says that Elohim has now spoken to us through his Son. So here it is. We're to follow what the Son has taught us. We're to follow what the Son is teaching. And the Son of Elohim says that Torah is going to remain permanent. And then he says, whoever breaks one of the smallest, the least of the commandments, and teaches others to do the same, will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. This does not sound like that the Messiah Yeshua is eliminating the Torah and the prophets that had spoken prior to his coming. What he is doing, now being the one that we are to listen to, because Moses said that Yahuwah would raise up a prophet just like me. When he comes, you are to listen to him. So now he's come in the first century, and he says that all of these scriptures, all of what those previous prophets prophesied, are to remain in effect. I want you to know I have not come to abolish this. I've come to bring completion to it. In other words, I'm coming to add more to this volume of scriptures. And that is exactly what he did with his teaching. Because we have the writings of the apostles, which is the completion of that volume of scriptures. Verse 20. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. So here we have the Son making it very clear. We have the Ben Elohim making it very clear that the previous scriptures that had already been written down were still to remain in effect, and not only were they to be kept, I mean, Messiah was really hitting home with the people so that they would understand, okay, good, we cool with you, because you're not coming and preaching something that is bringing a conflict with the scriptures. You just told us not only is the very smallest letter and part of the letter is going to remain in there, but you said it's going to remain until heaven and earth pass. And then you said that, hey, look, if a person begins to break the smallest, the least of what's in the commandments, and teach others to do the same, they will be least in the kingdom. But he said, but if you will keep the least of the commandments and teach others, you will be great in the kingdom. So he's saying here that all of these commandments are to still be kept. You know, there's some, and I'll say this because my journey in living a Torah-based life has not been one that has been easy. It has been met with a great deal of resistance, misunderstanding, and opposition. Because those who come from a theological perspective that is anti-Torah, in other words, let me break it down this way. Basically, it is anti-Hebraic, all right? And that stems right out of the Roman Catholic religious system, okay? And those same concepts transitioned into the teachings of those who broke from Catholicism and became known as Protestants. Those are your Presbyterians, your Calvinists, your Baptists, and every other group that stemmed out from the Protestant movement, the what we call the Western Christian churches. So when we give an answer, anytime I give an answer as to, you know, why you keep Sabbath, though, why you wear tallit, why you do feast celebrations, I always tell them, my response is, because that's what Yeshua did. That's what the apostles did. I tell them because Yeshua said that all of the commandments are still effective. And he said that if we're going to be great in the kingdom, he said, if you keep the least of these commandments and teach others to do the same will be great. Well, you know, I don't consider myself to be the smartest person in the world. I mean, I work very hard studying scriptures and trying to read as many books as I possibly can and study as much history as I can and amass as much information as I can. I try to do my best to understand the Greek to the degree where I can be able to read it and decipher through it and understand the terms and what they really mean, and the Hebrew as well, because I want to do my best to teach the scriptures. But, you know, it don't take a brain surgeon or a rocket scientist to figure out that Messiah made it very clear that if you want to be great in the kingdom, then you need to keep even the smallest, or what is considered to be the least of the commandments. And I want to be great in the kingdom. I don't know about everybody else, but I take the words of the Messiah seriously. I take what he said above what all of the other apostles have said. Because there are brethren who have this idea, well, Paul said this, Peter said this, and Jacob or James said this. And much of the time when scripture is pulled from these other writings of the apostles, the particular passages that are pulled out that are used to try to be used as a superimposition over what the Messiah has stated is not interpreted in the proper context of the history and the culture of the times. And so, when we deal with the Bible, especially when it comes to following what the Son has taught us, seeing that in these last days he has spoken to us through his Son, we need to go back and find out, what did the Son say? And then there are those who will like to compare or contrast the teachings of Messiah to the so-called teachings of Moses, as if Moses was the one who was the originator of the scriptures that are also called the Torah. But I want us to check that out. Did Moses provide his own revelation, his own insight, his own perspective? Did he give our ancient fathers what he thought was needed to provide them with a system of statutes and ordinances? Did that come from Moses? Let's go to Deuteronomy, book of Devarim, commonly called Deuteronomy. Let's go to chapter 4. Let's see what the scriptures say. And the reason why I choose this particular book, because in this particular book, Moses is getting ready to give instruction to the second generation of Israelites that came from Egyptian captivity. The first generation that came out of Egyptian captivity, the Most High would not let them go into the land of promise. But their sons and daughters, their children, he said they were going to be the ones that would inherit the land. So Moses said, look, I need to give them the same instructions that their parents were given. So let's see what these scriptures say to us. For those who have this idea that the teachings of Moses are Moses' teachings, all right? See, what we fail to understand is that when the Bible talks about Moses, it's talking about a section of scripture that was written by Moses. It is not that it was Moses' teaching that originated from him. Moses did not give any teachings that originated from him. He was a prophet and called the most humble of all the prophets. Everything that he gave as an instruction came directly from Yahuwah. So let's go to Devarim, commonly called Deuteronomy. Chapter 4, let's read verses 1 and 2. Listen to what it says. Chapter 4 of Devarim, or Deuteronomy, verses 1 and 2. It says, so now, it says, Israel, give heed to the statutes and ordinances that I am teaching you to observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that Yahuwah, your Elohim, of your ancestors is giving you. You must neither add anything to what I command you, nor take away anything from it, but keep the commandments. Listen to what it says. But keep the commandments of Yahuwah, your Elohim, with which I am charging you. Now notice, Moses says that they are to keep the commandments that he is charging them. Right? You hear that right off the bat. But here's another passage. Let's go to Deuteronomy, or Devarim, chapter 1. And we want to get to the 3rd verse. I'll give you a moment to look it up. Devarim, chapter 1. And we're going to look at the 3rd verse. And it says, in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the Israelites, just as Yahuwah had commanded him to speak to them. So here we have, right in the beginning of the chapter, it says that Moses is about to speak to the Israelites as Elohim had commanded him. Everything Moses said to the Israelites, our ancestors, is verbatim what Elohim told him. Let's go down to the 5th verse. And it says, beyond the Jordan in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this Torah as follows. And then he begins to talk to them about what Yahuwah said in regards to leaving from where they are and going into the land of promise. And of course, I just read over in the 4th chapter, verses 1 and 2, where Moses says, these ordinances, these statutes that I'm teaching you to observe, he says, listen, you are not to take anything away from it, neither are you supposed to add anything to it. Why? Because all of these devarim, these words, are from Elohim. Our Elohim, Yahuwah. This is the origination of the teachings that Moses gave. Moses did not come up with anything that's written in this book out of his own head. These were all instructions given by the Almighty to address the Israelites, our ancient fathers, as to how they were to deal with one another within the framework of the culture of that time. It's important that we catch this. All of this was what Elohim had declared. Hey, let me read a little more. Verse 5. I'm just trying to confirm some things so we can understand that everything written in the book of Devarim was not Moses's ideas. It was not Moses's belief or Moses's perspective. It was what thus saith Yahuwah. Verse 5 of chapter 4, it says, see, just as Yahuwah my Elohim has charged me. So who gave Elohim the charge? Who gave Moses the charge? Elohim did. It says, see, just as Yahuwah my Elohim has charged me, I now teach you statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. You must observe them diligently, for this will show your wisdom and discernment to the peoples who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and discerning people. For what other great nation has an Elohim so near to it as Yahuwah, our Elohim, is whenever we call to him? And what other great nation has statutes, listen to this, and ordinances as just as this entire Torah that I am setting before you today. So, everything written in the book of Devarim all came from Yahuwah, not from Moses. So it's important that we understand that when we look at the scriptures and we make an assumption that the Torah are the teachings of Moses because that was the phrase that was used during the time of the first century, our Israelite ancestors in the first century understood that the teachings of Moses were in actuality the teachings of Yahuwah. That was an understood principle. Come on, y'all, let's be scholarly, please. But anytime you approach the Bible and you're not dealing with the Bible from a scholarly perspective, you're not reading all of the scriptures that relate to proving that these scriptures here that were written by Moses, where you have commandments and statutes and judgments, where you have all of that, and you want to try and pit the words of the Messiah against the teachings, so-called teachings of Moses, you run the risk of getting yourself into a place of opposition with the Almighty. And let me go even a step further. Because you see, it was the writer of the book of Hebrews that made the statement that in these last days we are to listen to his son, because he wanted to emphasize the importance that now that the Messiah is here, whatever perspective you had on anything before, you need to squash that and you need to hear the perspective of the Messiah. That's the point that the writer of Hebrews was getting at. The writer of Hebrews was not saying that all of what Elohim spoke to our fathers by the prophets are no longer valid. He was not saying that, because if he was saying that, he would be coming into direct conflict with what the Messiah said about the permanence of all of these scriptures, which contain the writings of Moses, the great prophet, and the writings of all of the other prophets. So when we look at this statement in Hebrews, that in these last days, he's spoken to us by his son. The reason why the Messiah didn't have to elaborate on keeping the Sabbath is because that was already a known practice of the first century. When the Messiah made it plain that the Torah and the prophets and the smallest of the commandments were to be kept, it was already understood. You keep the Sabbath. It was already understood. You keep the feast. It was already understood. You eat clean animals. That was already understood. He didn't have to go and teach all of that again. The people during the time frame in which the Messiah lived already knew all of the commandments. He didn't have to go over it again. So for those brothers and sisters that have this idea that, oh, the Messiah didn't teach this and the Messiah didn't teach that, the Messiah already taught by virtue of emphasizing very, very clearly the permanence of the Torah and the prophets still being in effect. So I want to just really help us to understand and really have clarity on the fact that our Messiah and his teaching never eliminated the Torah or the prophets. But what he did do was help the people in his generation to understand the spirit of the Torah. In other words, he said, you know, they say don't murder. He said, but I say to you, don't hate your brother. You know, he was trying to help us to understand that, yeah, there are things that we're not supposed to do. But in your heart and in your mind, you need to eliminate these things, these thoughts that produce the sin, even though you might not commit them. Because that's a place where he said, for out of the heart proceeds murders, adulteries, thefts, uncleanness. In other words, what he's saying is, along with not committing the act of disobedience, of breaking the commandments. Don't break the commandments in your heart. Don't break the commandments in your mind. Don't look at a woman and lust after her and imagine her undressed and, you know. He said, because if you do that, then you have already committed adultery with her, even though you haven't laid a finger on her. He was dealing with issues of the heart. So the Almighty wanted us to understand that, listen, it's more than just the act being done, but you must have a pure heart as well. These were the things that the Messiah was focusing on. When you take a careful reading of the writings of the apostles in the teaching of Messiah, this is what the Messiah was emphasizing all throughout the scriptures. Even when it had to do with the issue of divorce. You know, there are some that will say, well, Moses said we could divorce our wives. And then there are some who think that Moses gave the permission. Moses did not give permission. Yahweh told Moses what to say. That part where it says that if you, if you have a woman that you marry and you find some uncleanness in her, and he says you put her away, right? That's what it says. And it says that she go and be another man's husband. That if that other man divorces her, she cannot go back to her first husband because that would bring abomination to the land. Yeah, the Most High was the one who told Moses to say that. But the Pharisees in their generation, they took what Moses said and interpreted that in the most liberal way as possible, where they were telling people you can divorce your wife for any reason. Moses was not giving a commandment on how to be able to get rid of your spouse for any reason. The understood principle behind what Moses was saying had to do with the fact that if the husband found out that the wife had been unfaithful but could not prove it, it says if he has found some uncleanness in her, how do you get unclean? You get unclean by somehow not being faithful. Because Torah had already said that if you are found and you are committing sexual immorality and you're married and you're found, both the one who's married and the person who was caught in the adultery with the married person would be stoned. Torah had already given the judgment regarding that. But we find even the Most High himself, used the divorce law with reference to his own people. Yes. That's because the Most High was the one who gave it to Moses. Go read your Bibles. Read in Jeremiah. Jeremiah, I believe, is the 3rd chapter. But Jeremiah is prophesying to the people, and the Most High says to him, he says, you've seen what backsliding Israel has done? and how I gave them a writing of divorcement and sent her away because she has went up on every high mountain and has played the harlot. See, the Almighty said the reason why he divorced, he said because she was committing sexual immorality. So I divorced her and I sent her out of my house. What does that mean? The people were worshiping idols. That was the sexual immorality to Elohim. And Elohim caused another nation to come and remove them out of the land. So the point that I'm trying to make, is that all of these commandments that we find in Devarim are not Moses' origination. Elohim is the one. Yahuwah is the one who originated, who gave the charge and told Moses, this is what I want you to teach the people. This is what I want them to know so that they'll know how to live in the land and to have prosperity. So it's important that we understand that. There's a lot of false teaching that has come up and continues to come up. And as a teacher of the scriptures, it's my responsibility to do my best to provide a balance, to show us as his people that these scriptures that have been given to us, both the Hebrew scriptures and the writings of the apostles, have been given to us, and they are permanent. We are to continue to follow them to the best of our knowledge and ability within the context as to how they have been given to us. And so, with that being said, I trust that this teaching has been helpful to you, that it has helped to shed some light and to bring some clarity as to how we are to understand and look at the scriptures. I trust that it has helped to clear up some confusion in the minds of those who have heard different views, different voices, different perspectives, because we do not want to, at the end of our days here, stand before the Almighty and say that we did not know. It's important that we always speak truth and that we seek the word diligently so that we do not introduce our own agenda, our own plan, our own purpose, but that we seek after the purpose of the Almighty. The Most High bless you. Abba Yah, thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to share and to teach the word today. I trust that it has been a benefit to the hearer, that it has caused them to be able to look at the scriptures properly and accurately as they are able to see the evidences of what our Messiah actually said regarding all of the Bible and how we are to embrace all of it and to follow his perspective as we move forward. We thank you for giving us your beloved Son, and we ask that you would help us to be submissive to what he says, or more accurately, what he has already said. We thank you today in the mighty name of Yahshua. Well, I trust this teaching has been a blessing to each and every one of you. And I'd like to invite you to go and view our website at www.ncmmi.20m.com and view our link called the Written Word Library. We have a number of resources there for your biblical enrichment, and trust that it will help you to grow in your faith. For those of you who may be watching and you may want to connect with this ministry, we definitely encourage you to connect with this ministry. You can be a part of this congregation as being a virtual member of the congregation, should you choose. And if that's something that you would like to do, then by all means, please contact us. View our website and send an email to us to let us know your desire to want to connect with us. And if you desire to be a partner with the ministry, we have a ministry network which is called the House of Israel Fellowship. And if you go to the website at www.ncmmi.20m.com, you can look at our links, and if you click on House of Israel Fellowship, you can read that information and become a partner with this ministry. We thank you so much for listening. Trust that this has been a blessing to you, and we do ask that you would share a donation with us. Your donation helps us to be able to continue to bring this word to the nations and also to be able to support the ministries that are in connection with us. One ministry in particular that we help, we have a ministry connected with us in Kenya, and the overseer there has an orphanage, and we make it our business to send support for that orphanage. And when you help, when you assist us by your donation, it helps us to be able to provide for those in the orphanage and also to be able to take care of whatever ministry expenses that we have to keep pushing this word out to the nations. We thank you so much for it. But most of all, we ask for your prayers, that you would continue to pray for us, that we will continue to be a viable ministry to the nations. And for those who may be watching this by YouTube, we ask that you would subscribe and that you would like and that you would share. The Most High bless you. Shalom.